light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. Today I just wanted to offer a few thoughts and reflections on the subject of vulnerability. One of the profound quotes that I often come back to is drawn from the words of Helen Keller, a woman who was born blind and deaf and had, and by a miracle of intervention facilitated by Anne Sullivan, learned how, in spite of both of those, to communicate with the world around her, and became so well educated that she ambitious that she even developed the ability to speak after a fashion, even though she was blind and deaf. That they came up with a way by which she could do that, but she was also apparently doing a lot of writing on her perceptions and reflections, and the way she found, to the very last, she found the world so fascinating and so worthy of exploration. And there was, I'd often heard the latter part of the quote, but I hadn't heard the first part until there was another show on television that actually used it and quoted it. And that particular show was dealing with a threat to general security within a suburban community. And I thought the writers of the show did a good job in that they didn't sidestep the delicate issue of the central cast of the show having doubts and internal wrestlings with having to lie to people in that particular neighborhood, presumably in order to create a sense of security, because the thought was that if we tell them what's really going on, everyone will panic. And consequently, we have to tell them a lie in order to get them to be calm, so that we don't have to deal with the panic at the same time as we're trying to solve the crime and so forth. Helen Keller, the quote that the show used at the very beginning of the show, or it was at the very beginning or the very end, was where they basically, her comment on the theme of the show, on this issue of vulnerability and security. Helen Keller's words were that security is a fiction and does not exist in nature. And then she made another comment about it that I don't recall, but it wound up with the conclusion, life is an adventure or nothing at all. And that, of course, is even more often quoted. But the whole quote started out with this direct statement that security is a fiction and does not exist in nature. So these feelings of security that humanity seems so married to at different times, as reflected by the quote by Helen Keller, this pursuit of security is actually unnatural. We are pursuing an unnatural expectation and an unnatural standard. Everything in nature lives from moment to moment to moment, doing whatever it can, being beautiful in whatever ways it can, but knowing from moment to moment to moment that life could be over, without warning, without notice, and with incredible abruptness. And so I began doing some pondering and reflecting on security and the infamous political maneuver Homeland Security, which really was not at all about Homeland Security, and it wasn't about creating security or creating feelings of security. It was about giving politicians and military personnel and law enforcement personnel less accountability, and in that sense actually eroding civil liberties and basic civility in the United States of America. If we wanted to be secure in the truest sense of the word, it seems to me that we have to begin with first recognizing and accepting our vulnerability, but then move from that to collaboration. That, in my opinion, the best security against someone else attacking you is to be completely involved in helping that person meet his or her needs. That when we ignore somebody in need is when we give them the reason to steal what they need from us. Coming back to this basic issue of vulnerability, though, it's recognizing, in the broader discussion about vulnerability, it's recognizing that we all have limitations, that we all have points of vulnerability. We all have ways in which we depend upon others, and ways in which we depend upon the goodwill of others, and we depend upon the ability to trust others. If we are not willing to be held accountable for our actions, I don't think we deserve to be trusted. In a similar sort of way, though, if someone else is not willing to be held accountable for their actions, we shouldn't be trusting them. The problem with both sides of that is that one can essentially not have a civilization or community at all without some degree of trust. If there is not some degree of trust, you'd wind up with a group of people of whatever size competing for basic food, clothing, and shelter, and at no moment being secure in whatever shelter they accomplish, but having to defend it to where every moment of life becomes defined by violence and defense, rather than by growth and exploration and beauty and community, and working together and demonstrating love. I had a young couple come to me a few years ago asking if I had any advice for them as they were contemplating, I believe it was a marriage relationship. I'm not entirely sure what happened to them because I didn't hear from them after that, but they were asking what I would have to say to them that would help them to be more bonded to each other. And I remember saying to the young man, you need to let her see your vulnerability and see your weakness, because by being able to respond to your weakness and your vulnerability and being that honest and that open and that vulnerable with her, when you trust someone with something as precious as your vulnerability, it immediately gives them an opportunity to show what kind of person they are. If they respond badly, that is the clearest indication you have of what kind of person they are. If you extend reasonable vulnerability, shall I say, and you give them the opportunity to do the right thing. If they have no opportunity to do the right thing, then if they don't do the right thing, essentially one has to accept part of the responsibility for that. If I don't give someone a chance, I can hardly blame them if they never demonstrate what they would have otherwise demonstrated. If I meet someone and find out, totally different subject, if I find out they're an exceptional singer, and I could respond, well, why didn't you tell me? And they might say, well, I would have if you had ever given me a chance. But if I don't provide the chance for them to demonstrate their singing ability at any point, under whatever circumstance, if I have never given them a chance to share that part of themselves, I can hardly complain legitimately about not knowing that it was there. The curious thing about vulnerabilities and weaknesses and strength is the way they operate in this corresponding complementary kind of fashion, that very often in a community, if one person is weak in a certain area and strong in another area, there's another person within the community who has exactly the opposite correlation, that the area where this person is weak, this person is strong, and the area where this person is weak, this person is strong. And so by being there for each other, we get more done than any of us could ever do on our own. That's the whole point of being a community, is that we take care of each other, and we find ways, by putting all our heads together and brainstorming what makes healthy relationships and what does the tribe need, we find ways to maximize the strengths of all the individuals and ways of arranging the individuals to compensate for whatever weaknesses are present. Vulnerability ultimately is an opportunity and an invitation even perhaps to be open and honest, that and discover that when we embrace our vulnerability, when we embrace our weakness, when we embrace those parts of ourselves where we're not perfect, we may come to a more holistic, integrated, and consequently empowered understanding of who we are as an individual. If you know the areas in which you don't do as well, and use that as inspiration to chart a different course. If I'm paddling my canoe around a lake, and I know that in the middle of the lake are big waves, and trying to pilot a canoe through big waves can be kind of hair-raising and very unsettling, and hopefully if you do it correctly, going crosswise on the waves and so forth, you won't wind up actually getting dumped. But see, the canoe, especially a small one-man canoe, is not designed to handle big waves in open water. It's designed for going through small streams in shallow water and so forth. So when I was out with a friend taking pictures for my 2013 calendar of Sister Who in a canoe, the best places I found to go with the canoe was where the water was most shallow, because that's what the canoe was designed to cope with. If I needed to go to a place of much deeper water, I would have needed a different boat. But the point is that the canoe, which is vulnerable in the large areas of very deep and open water out in the middle of the lake, that may be its weakness, but its strength is in dealing with shallow water. And because of the way it floats, a canoe can go into much more shallow water than almost any other boat. It could get me all the way to the shore. It could get me in between trees and across marshy areas and all sorts of things that a larger powerboat couldn't do. A weakness in one way, a strength in another. And the powerboat having the one with the gasoline motor having exactly the opposite. So in a sense they were complementary. If you wanted to travel from this point to this point, you might take a canoe from shore to the other boat, transfer to the other boat, and then head out across the deeper water in the larger boat that was designed for dealing with those kinds of conditions. In a similar sort of way, if we work together as people, it's not that all of us has to be able to do everything for ourselves, but by getting to know those around us and getting to know both what their vulnerabilities are and what their strength is, that we can behave in a complementary fashion of one person providing that which the other lacks, and vice versa. But that is not a doable scenario unless you're willing to confess what your limitations and weaknesses are. I think in many cases people are afraid that somebody will use their weaknesses against them, but it hardly makes sense to do so. I'm not saying it doesn't happen or that it won't happen, but if that other person is a person of sufficient breadth of vision, is able to evaluate things in depth, hopefully they will understand that if they betray someone's trust in this situation, they cannot ask for that trust within a later situation. That they have become their own saboteur at that point. That they have become like the saying says, we have found the enemy and it's us. That if we want to be a community, if we want to have the solutions, if we want to have the empowerment, that can only come from everybody working together, it's going to mean finding a way to trust the other person, getting to know them enough, becoming sufficiently familiar with their story that we know how to be supportive to them in their moments of weakness. We have a general sense of where those weaknesses are within them and how to avoid certain situations because they simply don't do well there. If someone can't swim or is afraid of the water or something, it would hardly make sense to have a birthday party at the local public swimming pool and invite everyone to attend, because this person would not be able to have a good time there if they simply didn't enjoy being around water. Just an example. The corollary to that is if the community comes forward to address that weakness as a community and to be supportive of that person, and to say that yes, we're having the birthday party at the local public swimming pool. We still want you to come. We understand you're afraid of water. We provided a place for you to be during the party. We provided activities that do not focus on the pool, so that there will be something for you to do also. There are integrations of the spectrum of possibilities that could be arranged beforehand. In so doing, that would be the clearest message to that unique individual, that they are respected, that they are valued, and that everybody specifically wants them to be included. It's not, it doesn't become an either-or choice of either you have to do it our way or you have to stay home. Rather, it becomes a new way of redefining and exploring the relationship and the friendship you have with that person. That on one hand you can show that you really do care about them, that when you say everyone matters, you mean it, because you're living like you actually believe that everyone really does matter. And to the extent that one says everyone matters, but then decides to exclude some of those people because it's just not convenient, or it will ruffle too many feathers, or, so to speak, it will make somebody upset or anxious if you're there, so we're going to keep you away from there. If it's a men's club meeting and a woman wants to come because what is happening at the meeting is a lecture on a particular subject in which she is interested, by having that interest and expressing it, it basically identifies or reminds the men of the areas where they are vulnerable and how they don't need to be, because it's more about all of us working together than about any particular person being acceptable to everyone. Everyone we ever meet is going to have certain vulnerabilities, certain quirks of personality, likes and dislikes, all sorts of things. The more we've communicated with that person and learned their story, the less these differences are going to be a problem. The less we communicate and the less we share our stories, the more it seems to me that we're going to run into all kinds of problems. On that note, I guess one of my favorite sayings is the one, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. The idea that if we can look far ahead and see the implications of different actions, that we will know how to prevent the problem from occurring in the first place, so that it's not a question of knowing what to do in response to it, but knowing how to prevent it from ever happening. My friends sometimes tease me that they think I have too much common sense for the current era, and that may be so, but I continue to operate and think according to common sense. But having seen the huge number of people who don't, I shared with several friends that I kind of call it I kind of say it tongue in cheek, like I'm joking about it a little bit, but it really is a serious concern. What I call the American solution to problems. Imagine, if you will, that there is this beautiful bluff along the Grand Canyon, and it is so beautiful that everyone who drives into the parking lot jumps out of their car, puts their camera up to their face, and begins marching forward to take this picture, and they're not looking where they're going, and they wind up falling off the edge of the bluff and falling down and hurting themselves. Well, the American solution in practice, not because it has to be, but just because this is what most people seem to have allowed to happen, the American solution is to build a hospital at the bottom rather than a guardrail at the top. It would be so much more cost effective, and it would be preventive and make so much sense to simply put up a guardrail. But time and time and time again, Americans opt for the more expensive, less efficient solution of dealing with the problem after it has happened, rather than preventing the problem from occurring in the first place. I have to wonder also, as I think back to how often I was bullied in grade school and in high school and so forth, that the part of the pop psychology around bullies is that they're very vulnerable people who are afraid and are trying to mask or hide that vulnerability and fear rather than embracing it and addressing it in any sort of way. The curious thing about recognizing and embracing weaknesses is that very often there is something within the weakness that can be flipped around in reverse and become a strength. By having a weakness, a person may be moved to meet others who don't have the same weakness. By allowing that person to help them, suddenly there's a greater bond forming, and that which was a weakness created the strength of friendship. So there is a connection between the two. Most of the time, I think we forget to look for the connection. We are stumbling through thinking, I have to solve this all by myself. I can't ask anybody for help. And sometimes asking for help is the smartest and wisest and strongest thing we could do. It takes a reasonably mature ego to be able to say, would you help me? I cannot do this by myself. So in acting out violently, the demonstration of violence by the bully is not so much a display of strength as it is a display of weakness. In a similar sort of way, when countries take on a persona and intervene in each other's relationships, there have been numerous times where the United States intervened in a dispute that involved a couple of other countries that did not directly involve us, and it created this kind of a weakness of trying to put oneself out there and pretend to have more resources and more authority and more strength than one actually does. On the other hand, if we understood that our weakness is we can't be everywhere at once, and use that as the motivation to begin creating supportive networks and better communication and more multilingual people, all of these things would become the reasons for why a collaboration of diverse people could in fact happen, because they would all arrive to the place and the task and the point in space and time where the collaboration is happening and be respected and be valued and be welcomed. In a sense, owning the vulnerability frequently creates a lot of endearment, a lot of bonding, a lot of I helped you now, you help me later, maybe you'll help me and I'll help someone else and they'll help someone else, and maybe none of us will ever know how much effect we had in the other person's life, because we're simply passing from one place to the next without really knowing ultimately where everything is going to wind up. And as many times as I've heard somebody say, I'm planning on this happening to me, I kind of shrug and say, well, I hope it works out the way you're hoping. But in my own experience, I've more often found that life is an unpredictable place, and vulnerability is one of those basics from which we can never escape. And perhaps not interpreting that God somehow lost control of the universe, perhaps that experience of weakness and vulnerability is the thing that will create the relationships between what's going on in our life and what's going on in someone else's life. And we could wind up developing an extended family out of it instead of being victimized by it. It's ultimately not about whether I survive or not, or whether you survive or not, but it's about the creative and most beautiful parts of ourselves surviving, thriving, beauty replicating itself throughout the world. I don't mean that to be interpreted in a sort of martyrish complex. Oh, I'm throwing myself on the altar of your cause. No, that's not what it's about. It's much more that we are relational individuals, that we have something to contribute and something to learn within each situation. And if we reach for only one or the other, we unbalance the scale between the two. To come at a holistic understanding of ourselves and a holistic, integrated, unified, one-person kind of reality opens up all sorts of other areas within us, strengths that we didn't realize we have and so forth, so that we can begin to build our lives in new and unconventional and wonderful ways. So I guess in summary, whenever the word vulnerability comes to mind, to keep in mind that sometimes it is good because your vulnerability may serve as someone else's inspiration and thereby make the world a better place. Thank you very much for watching today. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be.